February is the month of love. We're talking about love your home. What happens when the love doesn't work out?
We'll introduce our guest again.
We have Lee Davis here from MDW Law in Halifax, and we kind of ended our last segment. One thing I'm very curious about, if separations are down, and during the break, Lee had a couple comments, so I'm very curious to know kind of what the stats are saying.
Okay, what do the stats say?
So, I mean, if you're looking at it on the ground, it doesn't feel a whole lot different. I think the recent stats that came out were that, generally speaking, the divorce rate is down at one of the lowest rates that it's been since, I think, the 70s.
Interesting.
Prior to that time, the predictions are about 40% generally in Canada overall had been the predictions for marriages to end up in separation or divorce.
Okay.
Fewer people are getting married.
Right.
So that divorce statistic doesn't really feel the same as it did before, where there were more people married and less people living together long term. So all I can tell you is on the ground, it doesn't feel a whole lot different. Yeah.
And from my perspective, obviously, we deal with a lot of separations. We're getting the separation agreements in. We're getting the court orders in. We're getting the interim orders in. It feels busier right now. I think just primarily, some people just fought it out and cohabitated during the pandemic, during 2021. There was such a shortage of housing. People needed to live somewhere.
That's it.
And now I think there's more movement. I think things are moving. At least that's what I'm seeing on the mortgage side.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, you've seen dynamic of relationships or of contracts in which people aren't necessarily married, friends are going into agreements.
So many different living situations.
Different dynamics.
So many people are cohabitating, never getting married. Some people are becoming domestic partners in the province of Nova Scotia. They're going down to Service Nova Scotia and say, hey, we are domestic partners, and that has some legal rights as well. We can talk about that. But I think what I want to know is, Lee, what are the implications of the Matrimonial Property Act in Nova Scotia? If let's say, there's two married people and one's untitled and one's not untitled, do they have any rights?
Yeah, I mean, when you get married, you're opting into that legislation. Or if you register your domestic partnership, you're opting into that legislation. So when you are married or you have a registered domestic partnership, the Matrimonial Property Act applies to you.
Okay.
Generally speaking, the starting point in Nova Scotia is that when you're married or when you have a registered partnership, that everything is 50-50 when you separate, and that includes the matrimonial home. There's some exceptions to that or some reasons why that might not be the case, but as a general rule, that's the starting point. There's some rules about both spouses being able to be entitled to have, possession of the house, that sort of thing. But it's different than when you're a common law couple, because then the ownership of the asset may be more meaningful than when you're married. When you're married, it really doesn't matter whose name it's in. The starting point is that if that's your family residence, that's the matrimonial home. Both spouses have entitlement to live there. And again, generally speaking, there's going to be a 50-50 division of the value of that when you're looking at the overall division of assets.
That's interesting. I think that's probably also why a spouse not entitled has to consent to doing transactions like a refinance. Whether or not they're on the mortgage or on the title, I get that question so many times. Well, why does my spouse need to sign anything?
Yeah.
Well, because they have the rights under the Matrimonial Property Act. What about other real property that's not the matrimonial home?
It depends.
Okay.
The Matrimonial Property Act also allows for more than one asset to be deemed or categorized as a matrimonial home, but other real property would fall into the same category as other assets. So your investments, your bank accounts, things like that. So it's just another, if you have an income property, for example, it's something to think about. But then again, keeping in mind that it has a different tax treatment. So making sure that you're getting good advice about that. Because disposition of the matrimonial home has different tax implications than disposition of an income property.
When we're talking about things like capital gains.
Exactly.
Obviously a big impact, right now. I've so many people that are really confused that filing their income tax as common law is the same as being a domestic partner. Can you maybe just clarify what's what, and what kind of rights does somebody have that files their income tax together as common law?
Well, I don't deal with income tax filing so much, but if you're registered, the part that's relevant to me in my practice is if you have a registered domestic partnership, you're under the legislation of the Matrimonial Property Act.
So same rights as a married person, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Common law couples, no. That legislation doesn't apply. In Nova Scotia, we don't have any separate legislation for common law couples relating to property. So it's the common law that applies.
Right.
And that's principles of fairness and equity. And so it's a different... The starting point in that case is not equal division. The starting point in that case is that who owns the asset is entitled to the asset.
Right.
And then the other person who wants a share of it, it's up
Has
to
to fight
them to stake their claim.
Right. So I guess it would be the same when we're talking about things like health and health concerns. I think there's a big misconception out there where less people are getting married that they think they're common law and that they have the same rights as a married person after being common law for a certain period of time.
They definitely don't with respect to property.
Okay.
Things like pensions, common law spouses and married spouses are often treated the same because that's written into pension legislation in a different way. But for property rights that would be covered under the Matrimonial Property Act, it's quite different to be a married person versus a common law.
And what about health? You know, you always hear about people be like, they've been in a freak accident and the girlfriend or boyfriend can't make any health decisions. It's then kind of defaulted to kind of the next of kin, blood. How does that impact common law people?
Well, for those kinds of situations, you really want to deal with somebody who's dealing with personal directives, who's dealing with wills, power of attorney, that kind of thing. We do have some lawyers in our firm that deal with that, but that wouldn't be part of my everyday
Normal
practice. But you do want to make sure that when you're doing planning, whatever that looks like, family planning, generally speaking, whether it's your finances or in the case of illness or in the case of death,
A will.
that you're thinking about what is my relationship with this person and what's the legal impact going to be if I die, if we separate, if I'm not able to make decisions for myself.
Nobody wants to talk about their plans, though. It seems. You know, you only want to worry about things when things go sideways, whether that is a health issue or whether that is a breakdown.
I wanted to ask you quickly before we run out of time. Transparency. If somebody wants to seek out counsel, and should they let the other person know that they're doing so?
It depends.
Yeah.
So some people get some advice early. So even when they're just thinking about whether to decide to separate, sometimes people will come and see us and just get information so that they can make good decisions. Because, you know, separating, as we've already talked about, and we've only just hit the highlights today, it has wide-ranging impacts on a variety of things that are very intimate and personal to everybody's
Housing,
life.
finance,
Kids.
parenting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is good to get that advice so that you can make good decisions about moving forward. And then whether you share that information with your spouse or former spouse, it just depends on the circumstances. So you want to be careful if there's any issues of violence, if there's any issues of, you know, any kind of dynamics within the family that might make that a bad idea to share that information. And sometimes people just getting that information, they're just on a little fact-finding mission rather than really pre-deciding or deciding what it is they're going to do. So you may not want to share that, shed light on that.
Yeah, and there may be times when they have a conversation with you and afterwards they go, man, I'm not going down this road.
100%.
Or I'm not ready.
I'm not ready,
Yeah, 100%.
So can you then give them type of an action item to get ready?
It's up to... Yes. I mean, part of my responsibility as a lawyer is to tell people what the alternatives are to separating.
Right.
And so I take that responsibility seriously. I always inquire whether people are coming to me if they've separated or not separated about whether or not they want to explore the possibility of reconciliation. So that's important.
Okay.
And if they do want to separate, then we can help build a roadmap to how to separate if it's an issue, or if they've already separated, how to get where they want to go.
How do people get a hold of you?
Our website's mdwlaw.ca. You can always check us out there. We're on Yonge Street in Halifax, and we're just opening a new office in Dartmouth, so we'll be all over HRM.
Excellent. Clinton, how do people get a hold of you?
I think the first step is checking us out online at teamclinton.ca/radio. We have hundreds and hundreds of blog posts. You'll be able to watch our show online after it's on.
Yep.
And you can also check us out on social media. You can see what Todd and I look like and Lee looks like. You know, some really great advice. I thank you, Lee, for coming on. Again, we only really scratched the surface. We could do a whole show on matrimonial breakdown for sure.
Lee, thanks. Great meeting you.
If you've liked what you've heard and you want to learn more, feel free to visit us online at teamclinton.ca.